Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Chief Marketing Officer of Ping Identity and your host for this morning, Brian Bell.
Good morning. Good morning. All right, let's try that again. Good morning. All right. Good morning, CIS NOLA. How is everyone feeling? Great. Well, welcome to day 2 of CIS. It is thrilled to be here and to have made it past day 1. What a fantastic start it was yesterday. How many of you enjoyed Frank Abagnale's keynote yesterday? Incredible, I agree. I mean, it was amazing just to hear the actual story, and even more striking to have that remembrance of what's important to all of us. So that was really telling. I don't think I've seen so many people pull out tissues and handkerchiefs and start sort of tearing up at the end of a CIS keynote anyway, so that was something. I'm also certain there are some of you who have no recollection of what happened yesterday. Based on the tweets, the postings I saw on social media, and then the stories I heard this morning, there are quite a few of you, many of you who are probably not here yet, that were out on Bourbon Street past midnight or well into the night. How many of you were on Bourbon Street last night? Let's be honest, all right? How many of you were out in the French Quarter but you have no idea where you were? How many of you had one of those Slurpee hurricanes that they're selling on the street? All right, you can confess later to drinking one of those things. Well, listen, I'm really, really excited and honored to be kicking off day 2. We have a fantastic speaker to kick things off for us today. You know, if Andre Durand is the visionary leader behind CIS and behind Ping Identity, this man is the technical inspiration, the technical visionary at Ping, and a leader in the industry as well. He's someone who takes our vision at Ping Identity, translates it into roadmap based on customer input, based on the technology, drivers going on in the industry, and creates that vision and that path forward for us at Ping, but also for others in the industry. And it's my pleasure to introduce you our CTO of Ping Identity, Patrick Harding. Patrick?
Thank you very much, Brian. Welcome, everybody, this morning. I didn't partake on Bourbon Street last night. I'm Patrick Harding, the CTO. I didn't partake because, you know, you take an Australian who lives in Boston and you put him in New Orleans. I don't really know what they were thinking. This is like going to be a scary week for me. Evolution and revolution. Notice the play on slides. Marketing did that for us. My evolution in identity has been interesting. I've been at Ping now 11 years this week, and it's flown by. You guys can start the clock if you like, because I'm going to lose track of time. I've been at Ping 11 years. Prior to that, I actually was a security architect, like many people in the room here, working in a financial services organization, thinking about identity. Prior to that, you know, 20 years ago, I was doing sort of network security. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about this space and stuff like that over time. I get a kick out of Andre. How many people were here for Andre's keynote yesterday? Most of you are here? Cool. So I get a kick out of Andre, you know, how a founder and CEO can, you know, revise history in his mind enough to realize that, you know, he invented an industry the first time he thought about that sort of term, something like that, as he did. So I think we've been doing identity a long time. It's been a journey, an evolutionary journey, I think. We all want to change the world. We all want to basically, you know, improve things as much as we can. You know, some years in this industry, we make giant leaps. You know, others, we take baby steps. But I think, generally speaking, we've been pushing the ball forward over the years and trying to, you know, sort of improve things. You know, a lot of you have spent 5, 10, 20 years in this industry, you know, trying to help solve problems and sort of evolving identity forward as much as we can. So this is the sort of the house we've built to start with. I mean, I started with passwords back in the day. You know, you go back to the 60s and 70s, I'll touch that in a minute, but sort of we've been evolving that forward. That evolution, though, I mean, it really goes back to the sort of the mainframes and mini computers of the 70s, when we were sort of, you know, basically reliant on passwords. You shift forward as we went through, you know, the PC era, into the web era, then into sort of, you know, mobile and cloud, then into things. And then sort of in the future, in 10 years from now, sort of, you know, sort of autonomous, you know, computing and artificial intelligence. I hate to think when I'm going to ask my sort of AI to help me solve identity for AI in 10 years. It's going to be an interesting sort of dilemma. Think about that a second. But it's all evolution. You know, in the identity world, I mean, we've grown our capabilities over time as we've had to solve different problems, from, you know, directories back in the sort of mid-90s through to MFA, to web access management, to governance, to you know, leveraging mobile devices for MFA, and then on to more sort of recent things like CASB, Cloud Access Security, or UEBA, User Behavior Analytics, all moving that forward. Or whether it's been the standards from Kerberos to LDAP, onto SAML, OpenID, OAuth, Connect, FIDO, to SCIM, all moving things forward slowly to sort of address different problems as we've sort of arrived at different platforms. Even the delivery models, you know, from directory as sort of best-of-breed software that sort of started this, through to the sort of identity and access management suites, back to best-of-breed software, and then on to sort of, you know, basic IDaaS services, and now to enterprise IDaaS services. All of these things have evolved over time, I think, and, you know, we'll continue to evolve them forward. But I think in all of this, you know, my belief is we have looked to change the world. I think with single sign-on, we've moved the needle significantly over the years, to the point where I think we can almost say it's been addressed and solved. You know, with SAML and now Connect, you know, and the number of applications that by default sort of, you know, address and solve, provide single sign-on, it's become an expectation, it's the norm. Everybody expects it to be there. So in that regard, I think we have changed the world, actually. But sort of while we're celebrating this, unfortunately, single sign-on, generally speaking, is still rooted in weak password-based authentication. So, you know, all of this sort of ease of use and sort of simplified user experience all falls back on generally, you know, weak sort of authentication models. And unfortunately, I don't think we've moved the needle far enough in that way. So upcoming is my gratuitous data breach slide, because everybody has to have one of these in any conversation about identity. It's a little like when we're talking about cloud 5 years ago. Everybody had to talk about cloud security as the #1 issue people were facing. But the sort of what I'm trying to highlight here is that the sort of the growth in compromised records that's really trending upwards and has been trending upwards, you know, for the last 10 years or so, parallels really the growth in the number of devices, users, subscribers, applications, whatever it is. That's all growing as well. That attack surface is increasing significantly, and unfortunately, we're not doing a great job of sort of preventing that. Some of these breaches come back to, you know, weak passwords or passwords stored in these records. Some don't, but the general trend is moving in the wrong direction, obviously, and I think we've got to do better than that. But it's going to be all right. We have continuous authentication on the horizon. This is something I think all of us have sort of recognized as the opportunity to, you know, replace passwords over time. And we can sort of invert the model a little bit here, where we can start to shift from, you know, passwords becoming the default way and the first thing that people might do, to a model where we can start to use that mobile device that can start to collect signals about who we are, whether it's contextual signals or behavioral signals, whether it's based on sort of, you know, where I am, what speed I'm moving at, my typing patterns, my voice patterns, sort of facial recognition, whatever it might be. Those things are sort of the transparent and can happen in the background that are constantly checking that this is Patrick, this is Patrick, this is Patrick, is something that we can start to rely on and leverage as an alternative to passwords. And maybe passwords just become the backstop, okay, that only is used in very, very rare occasions in these situations. A lot of people are working on this, obviously. Google made a recent announcement around some work they've been doing in this area. But the goal here is that the level of assurance or trust about whether Patrick is Patrick actually is going to change over time and is going to be communicated. And when it drops below a certain threshold, hey, something more active might have to happen in that regard. But I think this is sort of where we're looking to get to from an authentication standpoint, so that we still have the great user experience users want, but can get away from some of the weaknesses associated with passwords, obviously. In combination with that, at Ping in anyway, and I know that a lot of other organizations are doing this as well, we're thinking about sort of intelligent identity as well. This is sort of something that's being baked into real solutions today. Intelligent identity really provides, or sort of more heuristic information about what users have been doing over time that isn't necessarily related to what's actually happening on the mobile device, but might have been around what they were doing previously inside certain applications, or the behavior of how they've been interacting with applications, or even interacting with sort of authentication services and things like that can change. And that all of this sort of information about what I've been doing can basically be sort of rolled up into sort of risk and fraud scores so that they can be leveraged by authentication services and access services. So this is obviously some work we're looking at working on at Ping right now. I know that other people are doing this as well. But again, it's starting to move identity out of the world of sort of static policies and things like that, and starting to make allow systems to make more dynamic decisions based on sort of intelligence services that feed that information to them. So from a Ping standpoint, some of the things that we've been thinking about in our plan, obviously this intelligence service that might start to feed risk and fraud scores into our products, we can start to shift away from very static authentication policies that are driven by rules that you actually have to set up and maintain, to start to provide more dynamic policies and sort of adaptive authentication. This is something I think that's been happening in the financial services industry for quite a while, but it's something that everybody should be able to take advantage of so that we can start to adjust more dynamically how users authenticate in what situations based on watching what that user has been doing over time. And as important, I think, is to be able to provide that to the applications that are relying on it as well, so that we start to see sort of more adaptive access too, so that when I'm in an application and suddenly the intelligence service decides that, hey, maybe Patrick isn't behaving appropriately or the way he traditionally does, that application can get signaled to say, hey, you might want to go and re-authenticate Patrick at this point because we're not quite comfortable that Patrick is still Patrick anymore. And that can actually happen sort of within a session and things like that. This is something we're starting to incorporate into some of the products that are, some of our products that can be used inside or within a security domain. I think the trick is going to become, obviously, to make this available cross-domain, which is actually what I'm going to talk about in a second. So, as we start to think about, continuous authentication, intelligent identity, things like that, it starts to lead to infinite sessions. Like, if I'm being continuously authenticated, that notion that I might have had a session that can sort of die and I need to re-authenticate, so it doesn't exist anymore. I'm constantly being sort of authenticated and things like that. So, so how do you address things like session revocation when things go wrong? All right, we need ways to basically change or sort of kill my identity, kill my sessions across all the applications that relied on that authentication service that's continuously authenticating me in some way, somehow. We haven't done that very well today in a cross-domain distributed world, sort of revoking those sessions, so to speak. So, unless we achieve this, or unless we solve this well, I'm worried that we're going to start to leave doors open for the bad guys. One example of this that I talk about with our customers is that, we've done a great job, allowing employees to log in once into their enterprise IDP and then go and access a bunch of enterprise applications on-premise, or a number of applications that might be running in AWS, or a number of SaaS applications that are running out in the cloud, or even some native applications running on my mobile device. But suddenly, I've got all of these different sessions all existing across all these applications, all rooted in the fact that I started from this one authentication. Now, what happens if the user loses his device, or we ask the user to leave the organization? There's no way today to basically just revoke all of those sessions, essentially, log them out, whether it's the user logging himself out, or whether it's an administrator saying, hey, I need to log the user out of all these applications right now. Maybe I can go into every single one, but I don't remember where I go to from a day-to-day standpoint. Or in a consumer context, how many people here have, you go into some application and then it might be a banking app or something like that, and then you click on a link to move to some other service. And then they put up this interstitial page that says, you are leaving our branded website and you are going to this website. Don't forget to close your browser down, after you're done, sort of thing. They have that because there's no effective way to really do verifiable single logout between those applications. So they presume the user's going to sort of shut his browser down. But as we move to continuous authentication, that doesn't really help anymore. Because I'm constantly being authenticated, I actually don't provide a password. I don't really log in anymore, sort of thing. So there's some sort of issues we have to address there. It's not like we've been, haven't been trying to solve logout over the last 10 years. If people have been basically running WAM systems inside their enterprise, obviously, we can essentially do it in those situations because it's within a security domain and everything's trusted one token and you can revoke that token and be done. Because they're sort of sharing a session in that context. But in sort of federated or distributed logout, we've had a challenge there, a big challenge. We tried to solve it on the front channel, which is where we leverage the browser to communicate those logout requests. In those situations, we can share the state quite effectively because the browser is maintaining sort of sessions for multiple applications quite effectively. But it's not verifiable. If the user was to shut the browser down in the middle of all these logout requests flying around for maybe 20 or 30 applications, there's no way to basically verify whether the logout was successful in all those situations. We just don't know. We've also tried to solve it on the back channel as well. And by back channel, I'm sort of talking about API requests between applications to signal it more directly. In that case, it's verifiable because obviously you're waiting for a response on an API request to say, yes, something, the session was terminated or revoked or adjusted. But it's much more difficult for state to be shared, session information to be shared between those applications in that way. Not a lot of applications might have a back-end session database and things like that. It's been a problem. So really the ideal solution, essentially, what we've been waiting for here, is this kill switch for identity that sort of addresses both of those things, both shared state and verifiable. I think it has to happen on the back channel, but we just haven't had the right solution in place to basically address it or get there. So what do we do about that? What do we need? Distributed session management is really what we're waiting for here, some way to solve distributed session management. Well, the answer is obviously blockchain. It's going to be all right. We've got blockchain, guys. It's fine. We're good. Before you tweet that, please don't tweet that out yet. Paul. I'm being facetious. It's going to be all right, we have blockchain. Last year, I actually mentioned blockchain at CIS, and I sort of asked people if they'd heard about it. And I got a few hands out of the audience last year. I think this year will be a very different story, obviously. I regret actually I shouldn't have asked about blockchain. I should have been asking about, have people heard of or aware of distributed consensus? Because it's actually distributed consensus and distributed trust that actually I think is the much more interesting sort of technology invention that's sort of occurred in the last year that's got people really thinking and really excited. There's obviously a reason people are excited about blockchain. All right? unfortunately, blockchain, is a distributed consensus algorithm, but it was invented to solve a very specific problem, which was cryptocurrency. And in its design, it made decisions around how it can make a cryptocurrency work. Whether it was, introduction of, the economic tie-ins to that distributed consensus algorithm, whether it was the political tie-ins to that algorithm, all of that sort of was wired together and bound together to basically create, an opportunity for Bitcoin to exist. That's okay. Nothing wrong with that. All right? But trying to unwind some of that to rely on it for purely distributed consensus, I think is going to be very, very difficult. Which is why Ping, when we sort of started to look at this last year and realized to sort of try and apply blockchain to identity problems that we were aware of was going to be difficult, we thought, all right, distributed consensus is interesting. What else is out there? And it was, fortunate that one of the guys on my team, Mance Harmon, had basically had a colleague or a former colleague who independently, for the last 5 or 6 years, have been trying to, solve a distributed gaming problem. How can I allow games to run on mobile devices or desktops independently without the need for a centralized server so that basically those games can just run in a pure peer-to-peer model? And to solve that, he had to solve a distributed consensus, distributed trust problem. Because God forbid that there might be arguments between two players that, one guy picked up the axe before the other guy in some Minecraft alternative. So he created hashgraph. I don't think he realized he was creating something at the time that was sort of equivalent or an alternative to blockchain, but he was. We quickly saw the sort of tie-ins together, all right, and realized, hey, this is really interesting. So that's where you might have seen a press release yesterday that was sort of announcing that Ping, I think this is a big deal for Ping. We made a seed investment in his company Swirls and a partnership so that we could sort of leverage hashgraph as sort of the foundation for distributed session management. It's a big deal for us. So you might ask, sort of, what's the difference between blockchain and hashgraph? So I'm not going to go into the details here and read the 45-page cryptographic sort of white paper on this. But at a very, very high level, blockchain is a distributed ledger that prunes itself as the ledger grows. And when it prunes itself, it's discarding a lot of computational work that's occurred to basically derive proof of work. That computational work is expensive and heavy and wasted, which sort of, with that proof of work involved, results in throughput of 7, 8 transactions per second. Completely reasonable for a cryptocurrency. It works. Doesn't work for session management or for online banking or for gaming or for auctions, I don't think. Hashgraph is an alternative. It doesn't discard any of the computations there. It weaves this together. It's a woven model, basically. Very fundamentally different approaches. Now, not to say that the image on the right is much prettier than the image on the left, and obviously has to be better. So, of course. So some of the sort of the other differences here, and this gets very, very deep very quickly. Obviously, both address distributed trust, the ability for unknown entities, unknown nodes to start communicating in a way where they can trust each other and let the consensus of all the nodes drive the fact that certain things happen in certain order. Hashgraph is fair. Blockchain is fair to a point. What's interesting and what a lot of people I don't think recognize is that every miner in blockchain, when he assembles a block of transactions, it's up to, it's the miner who decides what the order of the transactions are in this block. So in certain situations, in certain applications, that's not good enough. Okay? So this is where Hashgraph addresses that. Hashgraph is also low computation. You can run it on a mobile device. How many people are aware of the size of the infrastructure the miners in blockchain actually have right now? We're talking about, you know, data center sized rooms and specialized hardware to basically, solve the proof of work problem they have to do. It's a big deal, it's heavy, which sort of results in the sort of scalability and performance stuff. As I mentioned, I think Bitcoin blockchain gets to about 7-8 TPS. It can't get any more than that because of the model around how the actual economics work. It's actually self-limiting on purpose. Hashgraph, you know, 100,000 TPS. I don't like to spout performance numbers because nobody believes me. Let's just say that it's much more performant and can start to address types of applications that blockchain can't. And as I mentioned, they both do distributed trust. But it's not like I'm saying there's something wrong with blockchain. Blockchain was designed for cryptocurrency. It works for that. It's great. It's like the proprietary databases that might have been invented in the 70s. All right, once those databases emerged to solve very, very specific problems in specific verticals or industries, there was a realization that, hey, maybe a generic version of this might make sense, where we loosen up certain things, expand certain things, and we get relational databases in the 80s that are far more, it was a sort of a stepping stone, all right, a next generation version. Totally reasonable. So I'm going to move back to distributed session management. So that's something where we think that, a distributed session database built on hashgraph with distributed consensus and distributed trust, there's an opportunity there for us to really solve this logout problem today in a novel way, I think, where people really haven't recognized or had the opportunity to solve it in this way in the past. It's going to be back-channel based. It's going to be verifiable. You're going to be able to share session state because the session database in the back end is shared by everybody. So they're all going to have visibility into that session information. It's going to allow us to do sort of more fine-grained session management, not just the revoke or logout, but things like extension and suspension as well. By extension, I mean what we think of today as sort of inactivity timers in sort of many models, but the ability to, for me to log into 30 applications and be interacting in one and not have some inactivity timeout fire in other applications just because I wasn't there for 15 minutes, 20 minutes. So that can be shared across those applications in that way. All driven sort of by the IDP in certain situations. Obviously, this needs to work across different protocols, different client types as well. It needs to work irrespective of whether you're using SAML, whether you're using OpenID Connect, OAuth, or even a WAM system of some form. There's no reason it shouldn't work across all of those things. And to get to that verifiable piece, I think is critical as we start to sort of move to, more regulated, higher assurance applications like the financial services industry. The fact that they can start to do logout information between their business partners, I think, is key. And I can get rid of that interstitial page that I hate these days. So free your mind to this, guys. Just, give it some thought. I know it's fairly new. So if you hadn't worked this out yet, I've got some lyrics at the bottom. The next lyric in the song is actually Chairman Mao. I had absolutely no idea how to weave this into the story, so I just show a picture of Chairman Mao. And I don't have any jokes about him either, and he's not a customer. So I'm going to move on. This, I think, picture tells 1,000 words. The whole idea here is that we are talking about a distributed session database. That database sits sort of, underneath, underneath that, I think, is a DSM API. Underneath that is distributed consensus, possibly hashgraph, to drive all of this. Obviously, all the entities need to be able to participate, with the DSM and with the hashgraph, okay? An IDP might sort of own the master session or the authentication session, and all the relying parties rely on that, but we now have a way to share and synchronize that information across everybody. This doesn't work if it's just a ping thing, obviously. All right? I'd love to sell everybody our version of this, but I know Eric in Google and sort of Pat at Salesforce and Alex at Microsoft would sort of, throw up on their shoes if they said, yeah, we're not going to adopt some proprietary ping thing. So we recognize that to get industry adoption of this occurring, it has to be standardized. So that's why that we've actually submitted our distributed session management API to the OpenID Foundation to become the sort of, to become a piece or a part of the work they're doing on back-channel logout as a part of OpenID Connect, which is obviously going to work across other protocols too. In addition, if they feel it's appropriate, swirls will basically contribute the hashgraph capabilities for use with distributed session management. So we can leverage it there. And then the industry can start to work together to basically get past Patrick's high-level hand-waving and actually start to solve this and actually produce some specifications, get those into products, and start to do this and actually make it work. Kind of exciting. So revolution. Distributed consensus, I think it's exciting. I think this is going to open up lots of interesting and new ways to think about how to solve identity problems over the next 10 years. Once we get past what we're thinking about with blockchain and into some of these emerging distributed consensus algorithms, because I don't think hashgraph's going to be the only one. I think other things are going to emerge over time. This is revolutionary. This is a big deal. As I said, I think it's going to fundamentally change the way we think about identity over the next 10 years. As an example of that, IBM released a paper maybe a year ago about some of the issues they saw in how IoT is going to work, like the Internet of Things is going to work over the next 5 years or so. And they said that essentially it's going to fail without a switch to a decentralized computing model. And obviously, in that decentralized computing model, you need decentralized trust. It's going to be a peer-to-peer environment in those worlds. And we're going to need things like distributed consensus to solve the identity and security problems for IoT, as well as a lot of the other things that are going on in IoT as well. It's going to be a big deal. Really exciting. I've just kept myself a job for the next 10 years. It's great. So today, feel free to get access to our technical preview of the DSM capabilities. You can sign up to get access to that. Swirls obviously came out of stealth yesterday. People can basically sign up to get access to their SDK and start playing with that information. Playing with that. We have some presentations coming up today. Continuous authentication, some stuff from Lehman, who is the CEO and founder of Swirls on hashgraph, and then also something from one of the guys on my team, Mance Harmon from Labs, that is going to dive into much more detail on what we're talking about with distributed session management used with distributed consensus, much more than I'm doing today. So with that, I'd like to say thank you very much for your time. Really enjoyed talking to you. Thanks for having it. And we'll move on. Revolution. Thank you.
Nice job. All right, great. Thank you, Patrick. I think it was Chairman Mao who said blockchain's the answer to everything. And if Paul Madsen is here, if you don't know Paul Madsen, he creates the black T-shirts every year with the quotes on it. I think Patrick gave you a good one for next year, which is in a few years, I'm going to ask my AI to solve identity for AI. It sounds like a perfect quote for a T-shirt here at CIS. We have a great set of sessions today. Make sure you've downloaded the application for CIS. Everything is in there. I want to call out a few tracks you should check out. There's an IoT track. There's a blockchain track. There's a security and identity track that we sponsored with Optiv on. And if you're interested in learning more about Ping and a Ping customer, there's a Ping track today. So plenty for you to choose from. We'll see you back here at 1:30, where you hear Alex Simons from Microsoft give a keynote over lunchtime. Thank you.